It was 8:30 in the evening on March 27th, 1986, when the emergency services in Marseille received an unusual call. A body had just been discovered at the bottom of a well in the countryside near the town of Istres, about 30 kilometers from the city. The caller, who had made the gruesome discovery, was so shocked that he ended the call abruptly, before the operator could ask him any questions. The police were soon on the scene and found the lifeless body of a 34-year-old woman at the bottom of the well. She had obvious signs of violence on her face and was lying in a fetal position. Her legs were wide apart, and she was only wearing one shoe. Despite the fact that the victim had already begun to decompose, the police could tell that she had been very attractive. They also noticed some unusual details about her attire. She was wearing tight jeans, a blouse, and a pair of high heels. These elements led them to believe that the victim was a prostitute. But the police were in for a big surprise. As they would soon find out, this was not the case. The victim's name was Isabelle Lemonion. She was a successful businesswoman who owned a restaurant with her husband. Moreover, her husband was none other than Jacques Mes, a notorious gangster who was wanted for several crimes, including armed robbery and drug trafficking. At the time of his wife's murder, Jacques was hiding out in a small village called Saint-Zacharie, located about 100 kilometers from the crime scene. When the police arrived at his chalet, they found him in possession of a loaded gun and several bullets. He seemed totally unfazed by the news of his wife's murder. It was almost as if he expected it to happen. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Jacques had killed his wife to prevent her from testifying against him in an upcoming court case. However, he denied the charges and pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's theory was that Jacques had shot his wife in the back of the head and then thrown her into the well. But the defense argued that there is no physical evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, the police had not found the murder weapon or any witnesses. In addition, Jacques had a solid alibi. At the time of the murder, he was at a friend's house playing cards. Several people could vouch for him. In the end, the jury agreed with the defense, and Jacques was acquitted of all charges. However, the police were not convinced that Jacques was innocent. They suspected that he had killed his wife, but had managed to frame the crime in such a way that Jacques had taken out a life insurance policy on his wife just a few weeks before her death. The policy paid out a hefty 500,000 francs, which Jacques used to fund his lavish lifestyle. In addition, a witness came forward and testified that he had seen Jacques arguing with his wife on the day she died. The police were now convinced that they had their man, but they needed more evidence to prosecute him. So they began to dig deeper into Isabelle's past. What they found was shocking. Isabelle was not the kind of woman who would engage in casual sex. She was a devoted wife and mother who was deeply involved in her church. In fact, the only reason she was even at the place where she was murdered was because she had been kidnapped. It seems that someone had mistaken her for a prostitute and had forced her into the trunk of a car. But who could have made such a mistake? Could it have been someone close to the case? Someone like the person who had called the police in the first place? This is where things get really interesting. When the police reviewed the phone records for the call that had come in reporting the murder, they discovered that it had been placed from a payphone near the crime scene. The caller had used a public phone to report the crime in order to avoid leaving any trace of evidence behind. The police were able to obtain the phone records for the payphone, which showed that the call had been made from a local hotel. The police went to the hotel and checked the guest registry. They were looking for anyone who had registered a room around the time of the murder. And that's when they found the name that would crack the case open, Nell, the owner of the hotel. His name appeared on the guest registry as having checked in on the day of the murder. But André was no ordinary man. He was actually a police commissioner who was in charge of investigating the very crime that had taken place at the well. As it turned out, he had been having an affair with one of the suspects in the case, a man named Francis. Francis had introduced André to the world of drugs, and the two of them had become regulars at a local casino. On the night of March 27, 1986, André and Francis were at the casino when they heard a news report about the murder of a mysterious woman at the bottom of a well. They left the casino and drove to the well to check it out. That's when André made the fateful call to the police, reporting the crime. He and Francis then returned to the casino and continued playing until the morning. When the police arrived at the well, they questioned everyone who was there, but they didn't find anything useful. They did, however, notice something strange about André. He seemed to know a lot about the case and was eager to help the police in any way he could. This raised the suspicion of the investigators, and they began to dig into Andre's background. They discovered that he had a history of shady dealings and had been involved in several cases of bribery and extortion. In addition, he had a gambling problem and was in debt up to his eyeballs. The police also learned that Andre had been having an affair with Francis, who was known to be a drug dealer and pimp. With all of this evidence against him, Andre was arrested and taken in for questioning. He confessed to everything. He told the police that he had been having an affair with Francis and that they had gone to the well together. After hearing about the murder, he said that he had called the police to try and cover up their crime, but had quickly realized that it was pointless. Andre was charged with perjury, abuse of authority, extortion, and complicity in murder. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released early after serving 3 years. Francis was also arrested and charged with murder. However, he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. And what happened to Jacques? Well, he was never caught. He continued to evade the police for several years, but was eventually arrested in 1997 and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was released in 2011, but was soon rearrested for drug trafficking and money laundering. He is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a high-security prison in France. As for the victim, Isabelle Lemonion, she was laid to rest in her hometown of Is. Her murder shocked the close-knit community, and to this day, no one can say for sure why she was chosen for such a brutal crime. The story of the murder of Isabelle Lemonion is a tragic tale of greed, lust, and betrayal. The crime was heinous, and the motives behind it were complex. Yet in the end, justice was served, and the guilty parties were brought to account. This case serves as a reminder that no matter how carefully a crime is planned, the truth will always come to light. If you enjoyed this episode of Faisal Lacus, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most gripping and suspenseful criminal trials from around the world, all presented in beautifully written scripts and narrated by professional voice actors. You can watch our videos in either English or French, and if you like, you can even watch them in both languages at the same time, so that you can practice your listening skills. In addition, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a comment below to let us know what you think of the case. And if there are any other trials that you would like to see us cover in the future, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thanks for watching! See you next time.